I spilled red wine across my father's favorite carpet and reached for my phone instead of a towel. While the stain slowly spread across the expensive fabric, I searched online for a replacement. That small moment described my entire life better than I understood at the time. Whenever something broke, I replaced it. Whenever a problem appeared, someone solved it. I never learned how to repair, protect, or preserve anything because life had never required those skills from me. My name is Elara, and until the age of 23, I lived inside a world carefully built by someone else. Our home stood on a hill overlooking the city. Tall windows filled the rooms with sunlight during the day, while soft lights created a warm glow each evening. Visitors often described the house as beautiful, but to me it simply felt normal. I had grown up there. I had never questioned its size, its comfort, or the privilege surrounding me, because I had never known anything different. My mother died when I was 6 years old, leaving my father and me alone in a house that suddenly felt too large. Although grief changed him in ways I could not fully understand as a child, he never allowed that loss to affect my life. He attended every school event, remembered every birthday, and somehow managed to balance business responsibilities with fatherhood. One of my clearest memories came from a rainy evening when I was 11. A school competition had ended badly, and I returned home embarrassed after performing poorly in front of hundreds of people. I expected criticism because I had spent weeks preparing. Instead, I found my father waiting in the kitchen with hot chocolate and a ridiculous attempt at baking cookies. The cookies were burned beyond recognition, yet he proudly served them anyway. That night, he explained that failure was not something to fear. He told me that mistakes only became dangerous when people stopped trying afterward. At the time, I listened politely without understanding the lesson. Years later, I would remember every word. Another memory stayed with me as well. When I turned 16, my father canceled an important business trip because I wanted him at my birthday dinner. Several executives were unhappy about the decision, and one of them even called during the celebration. My father switched off his phone and returned it to his pocket without answering. At that moment, I believed he was choosing me over work. Much later, I realized he was choosing what mattered most. Looking back now, I understand that children often see sacrifice without recognizing it. Parents quietly carry responsibilities, stress, and fear while trying to create stability for their families. Because those struggles remain hidden, young people sometimes assume security appears naturally instead of being built through effort. Unfortunately, I learned that lesson much later than I should have. As I entered adulthood, my life became increasingly comfortable. Most mornings started close to noon because I rarely had a reason to wake up earlier. My days revolved around social events, shopping trips, expensive restaurants, and short vacations with friends. My schedule appeared busy from the outside, yet very little of it contributed to personal growth. I enjoyed freedom without responsibility. I enjoyed comfort without understanding its cost. Most importantly, I enjoyed success that I had never earned. Several friends spoke seriously about careers, graduate programs, and future goals. Whenever those conversations began, I usually changed the subject. Long-term planning felt unnecessary because I assumed my future was already secure. My father owned multiple businesses, valuable properties, and investments spread across several industries. Everything appeared stable. The truth was far more complicated. One evening near the end of summer, I returned home later than usual and found my father sitting alone in the library. The room was unusually dark except for a small lamp beside his chair. He held a notebook in his hands, but he was not writing. Instead, he seemed lost in thought. Something about his expression unsettled me. For the first time, he looked older, not physically older, but tired in a way I had never seen before. We spent several hours talking that night. He asked questions about my future, my ambitions, and the kind of life I wanted to build. Although I answered honestly, my responses lacked direction. I spoke about places I wanted to visit and experiences I hoped to enjoy, but I struggled to describe meaningful goals. The conversation ended warmly, yet a strange feeling followed me afterward. It felt as though he was trying to prepare me for something. I ignored that feeling. At 23, I still believed serious problems happened to other people. The following month passed normally. I met friends, attended events, and continued living exactly as before. Whatever concern had been visible in my father's eyes seemed distant and unimportant. Then everything changed on a cold autumn morning. I woke to frantic knocking outside my bedroom. The housekeeper entered before I reached the door, and one look at her face told me something was terribly wrong. Fear appeared instantly, spreading through my chest before a single word was spoken. Less than an hour later, I sat inside a hospital waiting room surrounded by strangers. The next few hours remained fragmented in my memory. I remember doctors moving quickly through hallways. I remember signing forms I barely understood. I remember staring at a clock that seemed determined not to move. Most clearly, I remember hearing the words that divided my life into two separate parts. My father was gone. People often imagine grief as an explosion of emotion. My experience felt different. The news created a strange emptiness that disconnected me from reality. Everything continued moving around me, yet nothing felt real. Conversations sounded distant. Faces blurred together. Time lost its normal shape. The funeral brought hundreds of people. Business partners, employees, relatives, and longtime friends filled the church. Speaker after speaker described my father as disciplined, intelligent, generous, and resilient. Listening to those stories revealed how little I truly knew about his professional life. I knew the man who protected me. I did not know the man who carried enormous responsibilities every day. Over the next week, letters began arriving. At first, I paid little attention to them. Most appeared official, and I assumed lawyers would handle whatever needed attention. My father had always employed experienced professionals to manage complicated matters. Then more letters arrived, and more. Soon, meetings filled my calendar. Lawyers requested documents. Accountants requested signatures. Financial advisors requested discussions. The atmosphere surrounding those meetings felt increasingly uncomfortable. People who initially appeared confident began speaking more carefully. Their answers became shorter. Their expressions grew more serious. I noticed it, but I still failed to understand what was happening. One afternoon, I sat across from a lawyer named Darius inside a conference room overlooking the city. Several thick folders covered the table between us. Unlike previous meetings, he looked genuinely troubled. As he organized the documents, silence settled over the room. For the first time since my father's death, fear returned. A cold feeling moved through my stomach as Darius opened the first folder. I believed we were about to discuss paperwork. I believed we were about to discuss inheritance. I had no idea that within the next hour, I would discover a secret capable of destroying everything I thought my father had left behind. And unlike grief, this loss would arrive with explanations. Before I share the rest of story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. The silence inside the conference room felt heavier than any conversation I had experienced before. Darius opened the first folder and carefully adjusted his glasses before looking at me. His hesitation immediately worried me because lawyers are usually trained to present facts with confidence. That afternoon, confidence seemed absent from the room. As he began explaining the situation, I realized that my father's financial world was far more fragile than it had appeared from the outside. Several businesses had experienced difficulties during the previous 2 years. Economic changes had reduced profits, investments had performed poorly, and important projects had failed to deliver expected returns. None of those challenges would have destroyed the companies individually, but together they had created enormous pressure. I listened carefully, expecting him to explain temporary setbacks. Instead, he revealed something far worse. 3 years earlier, one of my father's closest business partners had approached him with an opportunity involving a large commercial development. The project promised substantial returns and appeared safe because it was supported by valuable assets. My father trusted this partner completely. Their friendship stretched back more than 20 years, and they had successfully completed several ventures together. Because of that trust, my father agreed to guarantee a significant portion of the project's financing. The development eventually failed. The partner made several disastrous decisions, concealed important information, and accumulated debt far beyond the original estimates. When creditors demanded repayment, legal responsibility extended beyond the project itself. It extended to my father. I sat motionless as Darius continued explaining, the companies were not simply struggling, they were drowning. For most of my life, I viewed wealth as something permanent. I assumed that successful people reached a certain level and remained there indefinitely. That meeting taught me a painful truth. Success can create opportunities, but it does not eliminate risk. Even intelligent individuals can suffer consequences when trust is placed in the wrong hands. As Darius opened additional folders, the scale of the problem became clearer. Several properties would need to be sold immediately. Multiple accounts remained frozen while legal disputes continued. Outstanding obligations exceeded available cash reserves. Most devastating of all, the inheritance I expected to receive no longer existed. The wealth I had assumed would support my future had already been consumed by debt, repayments, and legal obligations. My father had spent his final years fighting to protect everything he built, and he had lost. The drive home felt endless. Rain struck the windshield while city lights blurred into long streaks of color. I stared through the glass without truly seeing anything. Grief had already changed my life, but this new reality attacked something deeper. It destroyed the future I had imagined. Until that moment, I believed I was mourning my father. Now I realized I was also mourning an identity. For years, I had quietly defined myself through security, comfort, and privilege. Those foundations were disappearing one by one. Over the following weeks, difficult decisions arrived faster than I could process them. The house on the hill became one of the first assets scheduled for sale. Financial advisors explained that keeping the property was impossible. The maintenance costs alone exceeded what I could realistically afford. The news hit harder than I expected. That house contained every important memory from my life. During my final week there, I walked through each room slowly. The library still smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. The kitchen reminded me of the evening my father proudly served burned cookies after my failed competition. The dining room brought back memories of birthdays, celebrations, and ordinary conversations that once felt insignificant. Memory has a strange relationship with places. A room can remain unchanged, while the people connected to it disappear forever. On my final evening in the house, I found myself standing inside my father's study. Most of the furniture had already been removed. Empty walls surrounded me, and the silence felt overwhelming. Then I noticed something hidden inside one of the remaining drawers. It was the notebook I had seen him holding during our last meaningful conversation. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Most pages contained business notes, calculations, and reminders. Near the back, however, I discovered several personal entries written during the final year of his life. I spent hours reading. The words revealed a man carrying enormous pressure while desperately trying to protect his daughter from worry. He described failed negotiations, growing debts, and sleepless nights. Yet what affected me most was not the financial information. It was the concern he expressed about me. Several entries mentioned his fear that I was unprepared for hardship. One passage remained fixed in my memory. He wrote that he regretted solving every problem for me because he worried I would never discover my own strength. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the pages. For the first time since his death, I understood that my father had not been worried about money. He had been worried about me. The following morning, I handed over the keys to the house. As strangers entered the property, I remained seated in my car watching the place where my entire childhood had unfolded. Leaving felt like closing the final chapter of one life before stepping into another. Unfortunately, the challenges were only beginning. As news of my financial situation spread, several friendships changed dramatically. People who once invited me everywhere became distant. Messages went unanswered. Social gatherings continued without me. One betrayal hurt more than the others. A close friend named Celeste had shared nearly every important moment of my adult life. We traveled together, celebrated together, and spoke almost daily. During the first weeks after my father's death, she appeared supportive. Then I learned she had been discussing my situation with others. She described me as spoiled, irresponsible, and incapable of surviving without family money. Hearing those comments felt devastating, not because they were completely false, but because they came from someone I trusted. That experience taught me another uncomfortable truth. Difficult times do not only reveal character, they reveal relationships. Some people support you when life becomes complicated. Others use your struggles to elevate themselves. A month later, I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. The apartment contained little more than a bedroom, a kitchen, and a narrow living space. Compared to my previous home, it felt tiny, yet every evening, the same reality waited for me. My savings were shrinking, the bills continued arriving, and for the first time in my life, I faced a challenge that nobody could solve on my behalf. I needed to build a future with my own hands. The next morning, I opened my laptop and began searching for work. I had no idea how difficult that journey was about to become. The first week of job hunting shattered whatever confidence remained from my old life. Before my father's death, I assumed employers would value my education, my background, and the connections associated with my family name. Reality proved very different. Most companies cared about experience, skills, and results. Unfortunately, I had spent years collecting memories instead of qualifications. Every morning began with applications. Every afternoon brought silence. Every evening ended with disappointment. Some companies never responded. Others sent polite rejection emails. A few invited me for interviews, but those meetings rarely lasted long. The interviewers were professional and respectful, yet their questions exposed weaknesses I could not hide. What practical experience did I have? What projects had I completed? How had I solved problems in previous roles? I struggled to answer because there was very little to say. Failure feels different when it happens repeatedly. The first rejection hurts because it surprises you. The 10th rejection hurts because it forces you to question yourself. During those difficult weeks, I began understanding why perseverance matters so much. Success is often celebrated publicly, but persistence usually develops in private moments when nobody is watching. After nearly 2 months of searching, I finally secured a junior administrative position at a logistics company. The salary was modest, the office was small, the work seemed ordinary. Yet when I received the offer, I felt more grateful than I had ever felt receiving an expensive gift. My first day started badly. I arrived early, carrying a notebook filled with reminders and preparation notes. Determined to prove myself, I volunteered for every task assigned to me. Unfortunately, enthusiasm cannot replace experience. On my third day, I made a serious mistake. A client file contained several important delivery schedules, and while updating information, I accidentally entered incorrect dates into the system. The error created confusion for multiple departments and delayed several shipments. The problem was discovered during a staff meeting. As managers discussed the issue, I sat frozen in my chair. Everyone remained professional, but embarrassment flooded through me. I wanted to disappear. For several hours afterward, I convinced myself that I would be dismissed before completing my first month. That evening, I returned home exhausted and discouraged. For the first time since beginning my new life, I seriously considered giving up. I stared at the notebook I had found in my father's study. The same notebook that revealed his worries, sacrifices, and hopes sat quietly on my kitchen table. Without thinking, I opened it again. Several pages near the back contained reflections he had written during difficult periods in his own career. One entry described a business failure from many years earlier. He wrote about losing money, disappointing people, and questioning his own judgment. The passage ended with a sentence that immediately captured my attention. He wrote that mistakes become valuable only when they teach something that success never could. I read those words several times. Then I returned to work the following morning. Instead of hiding from the mistake, I asked questions. I studied procedures more carefully. I stayed late when necessary and accepted criticism without becoming defensive. Progress came slowly, but it came. Weeks turned into months. Gradually, my supervisors trusted me with greater responsibilities. My confidence stopped depending on compliments and started depending on competence. That difference changed everything. True confidence rarely comes from hearing that you are capable. It usually develops after proving to yourself that you can overcome challenges. The process is slower than most people want, but it creates a stronger foundation. My financial situation also improved little by little. I learned how to create a budget. I learned how to plan expenses. I learned how to distinguish between needs and wants. These lessons seemed boring when I was younger. Later, I discovered that small financial decisions often shape long-term stability more than dramatic ones. Nearly a year after my father's death, I received an invitation to attend an industry event connected to one of his former businesses. At first, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to avoid anything connected to that chapter of my life. Another part felt curious. Eventually, curiosity won. The event brought together entrepreneurs, managers, and former colleagues who had known my father for decades. Throughout the evening, many people shared stories about his determination during difficult periods. They described obstacles he overcame, risks he accepted, and sacrifices he made to protect his employees and family. Listening to those stories changed my perspective. For months, I had viewed my father as a man who failed to save his fortune. That evening, I finally saw him differently. He was a man who fought until the end to protect what mattered most. As the event concluded, an older businessman approached me carrying a small envelope. He explained that my father had left it with him several months before his death. The instruction was simple. If circumstances ever became difficult, the envelope should be given to me. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note. The message contained only one sentence. If life ever becomes difficult, do not look for me in my money, look for me in your strength. I stood there, staring at those words, while emotions I had carried for an entire year finally settled. The inheritance everyone talked about had vanished. The properties, accounts, and the wealth were gone. Yet the most important thing my father left behind had survived. He left me resilience, courage, and the opportunity to discover who I could become without comfort protecting me from reality. Today, my life looks nothing like the future I once imagined. My apartment remains small. My salary remains ordinary. My success belongs entirely to me. And when I think about the empty inheritance, I no longer see loss. I see the beginning of the life that finally taught me how strong I truly was. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.